Hello everyone, Rachel Carmen here today, and I'm with Katie Waalkes. We're going to talk about homeschooling special needs students today. Katie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So I have just met you today, and you've already given me the rundown on your kiddos, but let's do that again so the audience can see what you've got going on there at your home. And I just want to say, in the background, your house is beautifully sparkling clean. So I'm going to guess, because I'm the homeschool mother of 7 and you've got 6, that this is a flash moment for you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I told the kids while I'm filming that they could have TV time if they help me clean up first. So.
There you go. There you go.
Yes. Yes, so I have 6 kiddos, and they are 14, 13, 12, 11, 6, and 5. I have 2 boys and 4 girls, and lots of different special learning needs within that whole mix there.
And that means that you're a blessed woman, right? That means that you get to see the glory of God every day because our kids are so individual, right?
Absolutely. The sanctification process is strong over here, for sure.
I get it, right? I mean, that is the glorious thing. I'll go ahead and tell our listeners, that is what I want for everybody, is that sanctification process, that getting to see God all the time. But I may be getting ahead of us. So why don't you just jump on in? Why don't you just go ahead and tell us, how did you make the decision with all 6 kids? Was this something you always wanted to do? Or are you one of the ones that wanted to homeschool always? Or how did you get into this? Because I happen to know there's a lot of benefits, or so-called benefits, in putting your kids, especially with special needs, into the public system. Lots of options there. So how is it that you made the decision to have those kids at home?
Yeah, so actually it started back before I even had kids. I grew up homeschooled. My husband grew up homeschooled.
Wow, you're a
second generation homeschooler. I actually used Apologia in high school for my science, and loved it. And it was one of those things that I always knew I wanted to homeschool. That was always the desire, always the plan, without knowing what God had in store. We did have a short period of time, especially, I guess I should give a little context. My oldest has high-functioning autism. He has dyslexia, and severe auditory processing, which those 2 things together make for quite the interesting bag of tricks there. And then we also have 2 other kiddos that have dyslexia and ADHD. And then my 4th has a genetic disorder. So she has a lot of medical needs and learning needs, which makes for interesting things. She has juvenile arthritis, hearing loss, all sorts of fun things. So we get to deal with 2 sides of the coin of having both medical and learning needs, and then mixtures of both. And so with that, when my 4th was born, we did have to take a pause, and I couldn't homeschool for a little while because we were in and out of the hospital constantly, and I had 4 kids who were 3 and under, and so there was just a lot of chaos in those first initial years. So we did do private school for a year. And then brought them back home again because that was always my heart and my desire. But ultimately, there's been times, even though that's always been the plan, there have been times that I have been tempted or even honestly just thought, is this the better option? Am I, holding my kids back? Because they do offer services in public school. And ultimately, after seeking a lot of wise counsel and talking to local therapists, talking to public school teachers, other families with special needs kids, I found the answer was the same across the board. No matter how pro homeschooling or pro public school they were, is they often said that there are so many great teachers in the school system that hands are completely tied, that they want to serve our kids, but the funding is not there, or the backing is not there, or you end up with those teachers who aren't looking to serve your child. And so ultimately, after talking to them and getting their advice, I realized that those services are actually fairly limited. You have to fight tooth and nail for almost all of them. And even when you get them, they only take them to a functional point. This is how one therapist explained it to me. She said with the speech therapy in public schools, they are just looking for you to be functional in a classroom. And functional in a classroom versus fluent in speech, is a big difference. And so they said they just ultimately, because of the limit amount of funds and time and resources, they have to just kind of stick with that lower bar. So they said even if your child was in public school, you would still probably want to seek services outside of that to kind of take them to that functional level in life. And so after hearing that, God has just been gracious in all those moments that I have doubted to just sort of reaffirm and encourage me in what he has called me to do.
Wow, Katie, you said so many amazing things right there. I want to back up the bus, proverbially, right? And just sort of take some of these things apart. First of all, I really want to commend you for the evident joy. I mean, there's just so much joy on your face and in your eyes. We've never met before today, but I see just this bubbling joy, and it's got to be God, right? I mean, it's just got to be God. And I just want to commend you for that, because that's it, right? I believe so strongly in our need to just lean into God. And Nehemiah 8:10, the joy of the Lord is our strength. And I mean, you're hitting it right there. You've got this joy of the Lord, and I'm sure that's what buoys you up to do everything that you do every day, right?
Without that, there's no way I could be doing what I do.
There's no way. You're exactly right. And that, that's the message. I know that in our journey, so many times people would say, I could never do that. And I'm like, yeah, me either. Right? Me either. I can't 100%. Do this either. It's a God thing.
And so I just wanted to mention that because it's beautiful. But you said a couple of other things that I think are really, really powerful. Thanks for mentioning that you took a break. That is just real and raw. Can you unpack that a little bit? That had to be, since you had a vision for this, I would bet that was tough, wasn't it?
I remember very distinctly like it was yesterday, literally being on my bed. I had just had a panic attack after just a complete overwhelm of everything. And my husband was like, babe, I think we need to put them in school. And I felt like a complete and utter failure. I was like, this is what I've always wanted to do. Like, I knew God was calling me to do this. There's no way that this could be part of his plan. And I was fighting my husband and I was fighting God tooth and nail on this one. But ultimately, even in that moment, I knew he was right. I knew that in that season, we needed to step away. And ultimately, I feel like when somebody who has never homeschooled before comes into homeschooling, something that they often tell themselves, or I'll advise them, is just take it 1 year at a time. You don't have to commit to homeschool for the rest of your life. Just take 1 year at a time, and each year faithfully seek God, and he'll give you direction if that's the way you should continue. But I felt like, coming from a second generation homeschooler perspective, I was holding on to it the other way, where I was like, we are going to homeschool this, and I was holding on to it really tight. And God really in that moment revealed to me that, no, you're going to hold it year by year, and you're going to trust me, because it's not homeschooling that's going to save your kids or is going to make your home the perfect home. It's only through his work. And so it was a really big struggle, and it took a hard toll on me, but I feel like God did so much growth in my life during that time to recognize that we take it year by year, and no matter whether you're homeschooling or not, you have to be 100% dependent on Christ.
Exactly. And so that, it's a 1-2 thing. We're talking about the joy of the Lord is your strength, and the real need for that dependence, right? That you get that without him, the old hymn, without him I would be nothing, right? Exactly. Exactly. There's nothing here to see if you don't see God. So yeah, I love that. Another couple of things. You mentioned the fact that a lot of the experts, like at the school system, their hands are tied. And I just wanted to highlight, I think one of the massive benefits that we have in our homes with our kids, wherever they are on whatever spectrum, whether it's attention deficit disorder, or it's autism, or it's some physical need, or it's just they don't like spelling, right? Whatever it is, you know what our kids need that they cannot get in the system, no matter how much expertise may be over here, is the physical touch that we can give them as moms.
So true.
And I know so many times what my kids needed most was not some expert insight. They needed a hug.
And I'm betting you give a lot of those
Yes.
out there for home care.
Yes, absolutely. And so many times too, I think in conjunction with that is when you're talking about these struggles and you're talking about, tutoring or therapy or some kind of service, you're talking about meeting a child at one of their weaker points. And when you approach that neutrally or from a secular perspective, that's a really hard thing for your kid to wrestle through without any guidance. And I have found so much beauty. We get a lot of outside resources. Like I have a whole team, right? I don't do this on my own. And we have outside therapists, but we have been blessed to oftentimes get Christian therapists. And even just the other day, my daughter's occupational therapist was like, Rachel, I want to talk to you about, and he asked my permission before he did this, but he said, Rachel, I want to talk to you about how your identity is in Christ and not in your arthritis. And that we can learn to listen to our body and the pain that it's feeling and make adaptations, but we don't have to feel limited by that. And just like to have somebody speaking that truth into my daughter in the midst of a really painful physical exercise, it's just such a blessing. Like I can't speak enough highly about that.
Okay, so Katie, you're just rolling this forward. You're making this easy. So it's glorious. So talk to me about that. How do you keep it focused at home, do this dream thing that you're talking about and have your kids at home and homeschool them and attend to their individual needs, acknowledging their strengths and weaknesses, right? And implement other people. How do you guard your space at home with all that you're trying to do and still bring outside people in?
I mean, that's intimidating, right?
It is so intimidating.
Yeah, I mean, your home is your home, right? I mean, this is your raw space. This is where, there's stuff on the floor. How long's that been there? So, and then you're bringing people in. How do you do that?
Yeah. Well, I've always said that like one of the advantages of public school is the IEP team. And it's the sense of that it's like several different faces. It doesn't matter their expertise levels, but there's several different minds that are coming together and looking at your child from totally different angles and perspectives that are able to see their strengths and their weaknesses and able to break it down into bite-sized pieces of how you can move forward. And that doesn't always work that beautifully. I'm painting a very pretty picture here. It can be very challenging, but that was something that I wanted for our homeschool. And I wanted that idea of collective minds coming together to help me, especially with my kids who struggled. And so whether that is like a parent, whether it's a grandparent, a neighbor, somebody from church, a therapist, a tutor, all of these things, I really encourage any homeschooling parent to kind of form your own dream team and understand it's way less about the expertise, although that can be helpful, and way more about how much they care for your child and the ability to look objectively. So all that to be said, when we wanted to go about this process of getting outside resources, we do a couple of things. We always ultimately pray, because truthfully, no matter how much research you do, no matter vetting or whatever, it is ultimately God who brings the right therapists into our kids' lives. But also then, HSLDA has a list of homeschool-friendly therapists for each state, and they can help connect you to that list. And so that was a huge help. And then on top of that, just reaching out to local organizations, homeschool organizations, or on Facebook and asking, who has had experience? There's a big difference between someone who's going to be good for your child and someone who is homeschool friendly and good for your child. Because some are going to be constantly questioning your decisions, and that's a very exhausting place to put yourself in when you're already an exhausted mom. And we've done that. And I'm not interested in that.
No, and I can appreciate that. And I do appreciate you mentioning that, because that's a very real thing. It's like if you know that you need counseling for your marriage or for yourself or whatever, don't go if they're not a Christian counselor. I mean, let's just, baseline. Let's not fight two fronts, right? I mean, let's get that right. The thing also, though, you're mentioning, you're just doing a great job, Katie. What you're mentioning, though, is it's really important to walk forward in humility and vulnerability, because you're talking about having to actually lay it out there and say, hey, I need help.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a hard thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. And so I don't know that we've talked about this. You laid out the different issues that you're facing, the different challenges, different opportunities, because, I think
we've all got issues, right? So
it's, some of them just get bigger flashing lights than others, but all of these are points of vulnerability. how did you go about assessing your children? Because that's a whole nother monster, right? I mean, if you know something's wrong with Sally or Bobby and you're like, we need to know what that is, it can be very frightening to find somebody at the same time that you're talking about, who do I trust with my child? What am I going to do in terms of labeling or naming this? Are we going to tell the child? Are we not going to tell the child? All of that. Would you speak to how you've approached that? Because I'm sure there's lots of different ways to do that.
So one thing that we've always been big proponents on, even before we knew our kids had special needs, was that we wanted to be detectives of our children. We wanted to be students of our children. We wanted to look in and discover what their strengths and weaknesses were, and to be able to have open and honest conversations with them about that. We didn't want to sugarcoat or hide things from them, because we wanted them to see that their strengths are gifts from God and their weaknesses are gifts from God of opportunities for Him to shine through in those moments.
Yeah.
And so having that approach going into it, I think, helped a lot. Understanding that's a foundational thing, whether you have special needs kids or not. And then we went to trusted resources. We've done a lot of research to find doctors that we trust. I read reviews religiously. Like, there's a lot of information out there on the internet about people's experiences, and you have to take it with a grain of salt, but use that to your advantage. Google your doctors, Google the therapist, look up these things. But then within that, seeking a diagnosis, it was always a matter of gathering more information to help me do a better job in equipping them for what God was calling them to do. And so it was never a sense of sticking that label on so that I could know what they couldn't do. It was just helping me to see where they might need more support or where they might need more encouragement. We've always been open with all of our kids about their diagnoses. We've always talked about how you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and He did not make one single mistake when He made you. And, for some of my kids, that has been easier to accept and to go with. And others, like my daughter, who's in constant pain oftentimes, it can be hard in moments, but ultimately, because that has been the way we've always approached it, she'll even say, she's like, I'm hurting so much. She told me the other day, Mommy, I'm tired of fighting with my own body. And she goes, but I know I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And I know one day we're getting a new body. And there will be no pain and there will be no sickness. And I'm like, I just love that. So I feel like it's all in how you approach. I feel like your kids feed off of your perception, off of your energy.
Very definitely.
Yeah, if you get a diagnosis and you instantly, I want to leave space for processing. That's different.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
You can have your own grieving process and whatnot, but when you're approaching it with your kids, always approaching it from that biblical perspective and not from feeling let down or like something's wrong, because they read off of that and they will feed straight into whatever you give them with that. We definitely have hard days. I don't mean to make it sound like beautiful and rosy all the time, but it really has helped to look at how can I just help equip this child better.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about the mom who's out there and, I would homeschool if. I do a presentation entitled, What About That Child? And what I meant when I developed that was that strong-willed, stubborn, fight with you about the paint color on the wall kid, right? That makes you want to pull out every hair out of your head. But it can also translate to special needs children, very easily. The one that is just the most challenging, demands the most of your time, needs more of your attention than you can give to all of your children. And I maintain that, people will come up and they'll say, well, I would homeschool all of my kids, but not that one. And I'm always the one that says, oh, no, that's the one you need to homeschool. Exactly. Because, I've heard it said that a family is defined by how they attend to their weakest link. And I don't mean weak link in, oh, I'm so sorry. I mean the person that needs the most attention, right? And all of our families, that changes. It's very rarely always one. It's, we come in and out of seasons, and sometimes it's mom and sometimes it's dad. But I can imagine that there are parents that have special needs kids and they're like, yeah, I could never do this. What would you want to say to those families who have special needs kids? Why should they
why should they homeschool their kids? I mean, because it's a lot. This is more than reading, writing, and arithmetic. What would you say to them?
It is a lot. I would say ultimately, I mean, if God has called you to it, He will equip you for it, and that's the ultimate answer. But I also think if you're looking for those things that kind of push it over the edge, I think the customization of homeschooling is far outweighed. My doctors always ask, they'll say, does she have an IEP, an individualized education plan? And I'm like, yes, because we homeschool, and all my kids have an individualized education plan. I tailor make it for each child. So I think that's one thing. I definitely think the flexibility around the needs. If you have a child, again, like you said, whether it's a medical need, whether it's a learning need, whether it is just they struggle in school, it's just not pleasant. They're going to have meltdowns. They're going to have frustrations, and giving them space to not being rushed along or ignored, and being able to walk them through that and have those discipleship moments with your kids is something that is unparalleled. And I talked to several moms. We go to we go to a retreat every year for families who have kids with this genetic disorder that my daughter has. And most of them do traditional school routes. And so it's interesting to hear their perspectives. And they say oftentimes their kids come home a complete wreck because all day they have had to keep it together socially. Like they have had to, they're sensory overloaded, but they know they can't melt down, right? So they've got to pull it together. Kids who have hearing loss, there is all sorts of studies out there about the amount of focus and attention that they're having to pay to be able to track everything the teacher and their peers are saying. They come home and they have nothing left to give. Their tank is at zero. And so they oftentimes will lash out or have behavior issues. There will be a lot of struggles, and homework will be a nightmare. And oftentimes parents will base their decision on not homeschooling off of those moments and say, well, see, this is a nightmare just to get them to do 30 minutes of homework. There's no way I could homeschool. And what I want to tell them is when a child is not forced into those social situations for so long, when they can have a break when they need it, when they can have modifications to their schooling to make it work with their brain, that is, I'm not saying there will be no meltdowns. There are meltdowns in my house, for sure. But it is not an everyday occurrence, and it's not the same as when they were in a traditional school setting.
Yeah. Oh, man, you are painting such a beautiful picture. I can just imagine how blessed your children are to be able to be in a setting where you can be aware of what their need is, just right here, right now, and not just have to rush them to the next classroom. I mean, what a blessing to be able to help them breathe or get a glass of juice or something, right?
Take a walk around the house. Or my oldest son with autism, his big thing is when he is just at his breaking point, he's like, Mom, I need to go swing. He's 14 and he's still he'll go out on the swings for about 20 minutes and he'll just swing. And then he'll come and he's like, all right, I'm ready to do it again. Let's go. And I just love that he gets that. He needs that physical and mental break. And then he's able to come back stronger than ever.
But you know what? You're pointing up to something that I think we get to do across the board in homeschooling, but especially when it comes to these special needs kids or those kids, right? Is we're actually intentionally helping them find ways to process the things in life that are so hard for them. Our oldest son had an auditory processing disorder that was not diagnosed until he was probably, 16 or 17. And he was also high ADHD, high focus, right? And when he went to college, what is he going to do to focus? And he learned how to roll a pen between his fingers. And he learned that he had to sit on the front row in the center to be right here with the professor, because if he sat anywhere else, he was going to be distracted by, a dust mite. So, but we had worked through that, when he was at home. You help them find ways. How can I function in this situation, right? Sometimes you can go out and you have the luxury of going out and walking around the porch or taking on the swing. And sometimes you're stuck in the middle of something and you got to figure out how to function. And so those are life skills that you're giving them permission to develop and to find. I mean, what a huge gift. This is a lot, Katie, what you're describing. And I can imagine, as beautiful as your background looks there, And it does, as somebody who loves order, I'm just looking at that going, that's just lovely. There's a globe and there are pictures and there's a table and a sofa. But I'm imagining that it's probably more real life than that when we're not on camera, and it's gloriously, chaotically messy and wonderful, right?
Yes.
Katie, how do you take a break? Because that's a huge thing. I hear this all the time with homeschool moms. It doesn't matter if you've got 1 or 22. How do you take a break? And then if you interject special needs, special challenges, physical, emotional, whatever, then the intensity just got turned up. Katie, how do you take care of you? How do you step back and breathe? Do you ever get to go to the restroom by yourself? That's $1 million question.
I do now that my kids are older, but not when they were younger. I think
that's a question that every anybody who's contemplating homeschool decision, the moms are thinking, what about me? When am I going to get me? So, there's 1,000 things wrong with that question, so we're not going to attack that right now. But the refueling thing is a thing. I mentioned earlier, you've got this joy on your face, and it's beautiful. How do you get that and maintain it?
Yeah, I think there's different answers for different aspects of my life. I think definitely prioritizing getting in the Word is huge every morning spiritually to help refuel me. I always tell my kids, I'm like, hey, mom's doing her devotions. Like, if you come in, that's totally fine. But they know when my Bible's out that they don't interrupt. They can come up on my lap and I'll just start reading aloud. But I really try to prioritize the time for spiritual kind of refresh. As far as sometimes I physically need to leave my space. For sure. And my husband can usually tell. He'll usually be like, you know what? How about you go out? And I don't care. You can go grab dinner by yourself. You can, go to the grocery store by yourself. Whatever you need, just take a second. And I do think that there are a lot of emotions that get very high when you're dealing with special needs. And there is a physical toll it takes on your body. And you have to recognize that sometimes in order to stay as a thermostat instead of a thermometer of your home, you have to walk away. So I think that that's something that's been helpful, and thankfully I have a husband who's super supportive in that. But I think honestly my biggest struggle is the refueling mentally, because there's a mental load that you carry. All moms who homeschool, I think all moms in general, deal with mom guilt and questioning whether they're doing enough. It goes to a whole new level. When you have a kid with special needs, you're like, should they be doing more of this? Should they be doing less? I know I'm not supposed to worry about benchmarks, but they're really, really, really behind that benchmark. Eventually this has to matter at some point. And there's just a lot of doubt. So I feel like that is the hardest part, because that's something that's really hard, oftentimes seems impossible to put down, even for an evening. Even just to say, hey, I'm not going to think about this, especially if you have kids with medical needs where you kind of have to stay on. You can't be off. And so with that, talking to friends, being able to go to wise counsel, I find it is easier for me to take every thought captive when I say it out loud than it is in my own head. And so I have gracious friends who are willing to sit there and let me just kind of verbally process. And I'm like, I'm feeling like this. I'm feeling like this. I'm feeling like that. And then they'll say, okay, but now what's the truth? And I'm like, okay, but the truth is, and I'll kind of go through that and filter that process. So I think it's a threefold thing for sure. And it just takes a lot of being intentional. It's not even about time as much as it is just intentional.
And just knowing yourself, right? And I can imagine that there are listeners that they're like, you know what, I don't have special needs kids, but I have a friend. And I think some of the things that you just said, you're highlighting some things to be a better friend of maybe someone who has a bunch of kids and different special needs. What I'm hearing you say is just listening. Let them be raw, right? I think too often we shut people down when they start saying, I'm tired and I'm overwhelmed and I'm failing. So we just need to let them get it out, right? Just let them get it out. Let them be heard. And then I loved what you said. Your friends were saying, okay, now what's the truth, right?
And that is so helpful. It is, I think if you are supporting someone who's going through this, is letting them vent and even asking questions, letting them go a little bit deeper into it and then helping them come back to that truth. Because just venting it helps in like a split second of a moment, but it leaves you feeling worse than you did before. And coming back to that truth always is so helpful. And if your friend can't get there, helping them get back to the truth is helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a beautiful thing. I love that. And then also, maybe sometimes just taking a break with them and going for coffee, just being someone that they can grab and say, let's just go, and doing something that has nothing to do with the kids, right? Sometimes you need a conversation that's not about the kids, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Katie, we have gone over we have exhausted all of the list of questions here, and I think you and I could continue to talk for a long time, and I hope this won't be the last time we get to chat.
I hope we get to do it again.
Thank you so much for your ministry. Thank you so much for coming on today and encouraging parents with special needs. And thank you for being such a beautiful example of the joy of the Lord. And I pray that the Lord will bless you continually.
Thank you.
And we will wrap it up here today talking about special needs. I pray that if you are a mother of special needs, that you were encouraged today. If you have questions or other items that you would like us to cover as we continue this series, please feel free to write those into us. We'll see you next time.